What made you quit a job on the spot? I had a very stressful job and was expected to answer Slack messages from my boss at any time, or I would be fired. He was in a different time zone, so often I would be woken up at 3 a.m. being yelled at to do something. One day in the office, he was talking shit about me on Slack and accidentally posted it to a channel I was in. I was killing myself for this guy and he didn't even appreciate it. I packed up and left. Best thing I have ever done. Older guy here, the lesson you learned is a hard one to swallow, which is that some people simply do not care about you at all, not in the least. You could give them your money, your firstborn, sweat and toil 7 days a week for people like this, and it means nothing to them. But it's genuinely very hard to believe this is true, that people can be that cold and uncaring. Why? Because you are not. You believe that hard work will win them over. These are the kind of people, if you had an accident in their house and were bleeding, they would be worried about the blood stains in the carpet, and only that. When you get them out of your life, part of you will want to show them, to make them see the error in their ways. But that is impossible as they don't care and never will. Good on you. That is so satisfying to hear. What is the mental picture equivalent of ASMR? Because that is my reaction to your story. You're living my dream. Sorry they were garbage to you, but thank you for making my day by showing me that standing up like that is possible. Edit. I should say that I react to this so strongly because I once had a boss tell me to my face, during one of my typical on-call 24/7 jobs with her, "Well, you don't really do any work during the day." It was her way of justifying calling me at all hours and yelling at me for mistakes that I was only making because I couldn't get proper rest. My love of your story comes from my disappointment in myself that it took me a full month to quit that gig. I wanted so bad to walk out in that moment, but I didn't. Bravo to you. Back in 1998 I was working for Dell selling computers over the phones. People were not quite ordering online yet. Anyway, it was so easy. I was making close to $100,000 a year BC of how the commission structure was. Living in Austin as a 23-year-old. So one day my manager asks me to train a new team of salespeople because I was one of the top sellers on the floor every month. I turned this group into the most badass sales team. My crew of 8 were all in the top 20 every week and were kicking ass. After 2 months, I show up on a Monday and none of the salespeople are there except my team and a bunch of other new faces I hadn't seen before. Turns out Dell didn't like paying commissions and health insurance and 401ks, so they fired all the salespeople and replaced them with temp workers making $12 an hour. My entire team was the first group of temp works. I was not aware of this. They were told they had to prove themselves and be converted to full-time with benefits. They were never going to do it. I told them they can all go fuck themselves and quit. I heard that week they cleaned house and everyone, even managers who told me what was happening, were gone and all replaced by temp hourly people. Not on the spot, but I was passed over for a promotion for a role I'd been doing unofficially for 6 months. There was no official position for it when I started doing it. It was one of the manager's responsibilities and they delegated it to me. Honestly, I was happy to do it and I was frequently praised for how efficient and thorough I was doing it. So when an official position opened up to do it full-time, I seemed like the obvious choice. A bunch of my coworkers didn't even apply for it because they told me they didn't think there was any point since I was obviously getting the job. They gave it to a guy that worked in a different department and had no experience using the complicated system required for that job. Then the manager asked me to train him in it, except I wasn't really asked. I was told in a way that sounded like it was asking. We called it being voluntold. I refused. I said to the manager, if I'm not good enough to get the job, I'm not good enough to teach someone else how to do it. The manager then accused me throwing a temper tantrum. I quit about a week later. Honestly, that wasn't the only reason. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Even the other managers couldn't believe he said that. Worked at a restaurant as a server. We just catered a large wedding reception. The owner's wife was chatting with the wedding party all night and occasionally getting the drinks. At the end of the night she said she's taking her share of the tips since she helped so much. I say fine, even though that's illegal in our state. An hour and a half after the party ends, the restaurant is still a mess and the owner's wife is just standing around talking while I was supposed to clean up. It was almost midnight and I'd worked my other job earlier that day. I walked out without saying a word. They ended up giving me all of my tips on my last check. I worked as a manager in this really awesome cafe bar. My interview was basically drinking a bottle of wine with the owner whilst chatting. Totally relaxed vibe. Local artwork on the walls, which she sold for no commission. Indie music as background noise so you could still have a conversation, etc. One of the guys who worked there was in a band and would often go on tour, and she always made sure his job was waiting for him when he got back. Fast forward 3 years and she became pregnant with twins and decided that she wanted to be a Sam, so she sold the place to a young guy who purchased it as a gift for his fiancée. A nice gift. No, but it soon became apparent that he did this because she couldn't actually hold down a job due to even the most simplest of tasks being entirely beyond her. It took me 4 weeks to teach her how to use the coffee machine. She spent the evening shifts giving freebies to her mates and she totally gave up on using the panini machine. After finally mastering the coffee machine, she announced that they were going to be redecorating, so we would either have to take a week off unpaid or use our holiday time. Everyone was forced to use the holiday time. Came back a week later and we totally didn't recognize the place. It now had white walls with huge TVs blaring out dance music, in a space that only had 12 tables, so loud that we couldn't hear what anyone was saying. We checked the rotas and I had lost 10 hours a week, but the band guy had lost 20 hours. Naturally we asked WTF, and she informed us that she could run the place without us, so cut out hours. We asked if they could delay the new rotas by a month to give us chance to find extra work elsewhere. I was okay as I had a second job that begged me to be full-time, but band guy didn't. She said that as we didn't have contract with her, she didn't have to give us any notice. Not gonna lie, I was fuming, so I took my apron off, placed my keys on the counter and said that as we didn't have a contract I didn't have to give any notice that I quit. Then promptly walked out and never went back again. The place closed down within 3 months. I had worked for a cleaning company and I had a total disaster of a person named Tina as my manager for about 4 months. Tina would work the night shift with the crew and basically did nothing. She would leave the majority of the work for me to do during the day when it was a lot harder to do as I had my own list of duties as well as whatever she left for me from her own list. I was teetering on the edge of quitting, but I hadn't found a replacement when one day I got a call from head office that Tina had quit, and for about a month the job was exceptionally better and I effectively was my own boss. Things were going remarkably smooth for again about a month when I got a text message from Tina asking me to do a bunch of extra stuff. I called the owner and they told me that Tina had approached them about coming back and that they were rehiring her in her former position, and I literally just packed up and walked out about an hour into my shift. I had zero intention of working another minute for that woman and held to it. I am a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about a month I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, "You know, this has been going on forever, right?" She then said that things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She then also told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made out a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, They suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. Not quite on the spot, but the manager was telling the new hires, which included me, how he beat the crap out of someone for some reason that I cannot recall. Apparently the court case had been dragging on for quite some time. Alrighty, little crazy. But what manager is completely sane? Then a few weeks later a hurricane comes through. Pretty bad. My house only lost power for a day, but most of my coworkers lost power for at least 2 weeks. So we eventually go back to work and the manager is telling us the harrowing story of how he managed to find a generator when a hurricane is coming. I'll spare you the details, but it's pretty much impossible to find a generator if a hurricane is about to hit. So this nutcase is trying to install this generator at his house and sees someone driving by, eyeballing his generator, or so he imagines. Like any completely normal person, the manager pulls out a gun and fires a few rounds into the air, to scare them off. I can only imagine what the poor person driving by thought when he saw this asshole pull out a gun and start shooting. In response to the gunshots, his neighbor comes running over. Why has no one called the cops yet? To see if everything is okay. My manager tells him that someone is trying to steal his generator and if it goes missing, he's going to hold the neighbor responsible. At this point in the story, my mouth is hanging open and I'm like, WTF did I just listen to? This man is ... insane. Why is the neighbor responsible for his generator? None of this makes sense. I slowly noped out of that job. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he ending up murdering all of his coworkers one day in a fit of rage. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman where I work. I work underground and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual starting working and after a few weeks decided that it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give him 2 weeks notice and without missing a beat the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks you're gonna notice that I'm not here," turned around, packed his shit and left. Was never heard from again. Had a job about 10 years ago doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage plus bonuses you earn for selling people stuff. And by stuff I mean terrible, overpriced services that you can get online for free. I was still in the phase of training where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls and after a call, he told me I should have paused to try and sell him some shitty antivirus service before I fixed his problem. Handed in my headset right there. Felt so skeevy when people call you for help and you have to turn into a telemarketer. Long ago I sold European rail passes and tickets over the phone. It started out as a great job, booking itineraries, talking about traveling in Europe, of which I'd done a lot. Then a new manager took over and we were given a list of questions we had to ask every caller. So if someone called and said, "I need to go from Paris to Brussels for work," and that's it. We were still required to go down this list of 20 upsell questions about rail passes, travel insurance, other side trips, etc. People would get rightfully furiously annoyed because their 2-minute call time would end up being 10 minutes of them saying no. I told you I don't need any of that and us saying I know but I need to ask you anyway. This of course increased hold times when calling to 40+ minutes in the peak season because every call took 5-10 times longer than they should. I quit within the month and within 6 the owners, who were Swiss, found out what was happening and the branch manager was canned. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy with the small fries and drink for our lunch break. One day when I went on break the franchise owner was there and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and my coworkers. I couldn't believe it. This grown-ass successful businessman was hounding at 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. Told him I wasn't gonna pay, put the food down and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend. I told them no thanks and never went back. I worked for T-Mobile Store, authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. 1 week, I had an amazing week, sold 55 phones, brand new activations on a business account with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happens so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office, and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually led to an investigation by the government, according to an old coworker I bumped into years later. I worked commission furniture sales and was always wondering how my paycheck was lower than expected based on my sales and the business's stated commissions rates. Finally, I made an Excel spreadsheet that would track deliveries for up to 2 months and give me a rolling total of what my next 4 paychecks would be. We were supposed to track our sales in the computer, so that's what I was doing. I listed what I sold, delivery days and times, and what I was to make. Once I told them I was doing this, suddenly my paychecks started to match, roughly, so I shared it with all my coworkers and taught them how to use it. Within a couple of weeks, everyone in the store was using my tracker and questioning their paychecks if they were different. Fast forward about 3 weeks and I was unexpectedly let go for performance issues. I wasn't the store's best seller, because frankly I didn't want to be, but I certainly wasn't the worst. I'm almost certain it's because I taught the employees how to track their commissions, which forced the owners to stop fudging the numbers in their favor. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually led to an investigation by the government, according to an old coworker I bumped into years later. About that, I work for a government enforcement agency, and I personally love to fuck up companies who pull shit like this, but we can only go after those we know about, so people file complaints. Your state attorney general's office has a complaints page you can find if you Google, and if it's related to financial products at all, loans, bank accounts, that kind of thing, your state probably has a financial services agency, sometimes with a different name than that, who you can and should also complain to. I want to hear from you. Edit. Forgot to mention most all states and the federal government have a Department of Labor who can look into wage theft and other cases of you getting screwed on the job. Wage theft dwarfs every other kind of theft/robbery/ etc. Walked into the interview, everything went well. Accepted the job offer, went to the front desk to do the paperwork and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount, and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 per week. I asked first about the amount difference, was told this the standard contract. It just hasn't been updated for your specific offer. I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. That's not how things work here. I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to have started asking where I was. I told them because didn't sign the contract, I was never an employee. Ooh boy, that was a fun call. Similar situation for me. Back in 2012 I was looking for a job in anything other than food but got desperate. This burger place had just opened up and was desperate for workers. They advertised on their window $11.75 an hour starting for all positions. I applied, had an interview basically the second I turned in my application and got hired 20 minutes later. At the end of my shift, which was about 3 hours, they said they would start me at minimum wage, because you haven't finished your bachelor's degree yet. I was speechless. If I had finished my bachelor's degree, why would I be working here, and for such low pay? I told them to cash out my pay immediately and I would not be returning because of their deceit. There weren't any stipulations anywhere on the sign that said anything about needing an undergrad degree for that much pay. They cashed me out at $11.25 per hour and I left. They closed down back in 2018 and every year Spirit Halloween takes over the location. Fuck 'em.